So this is the first part of reproduction, and this is the male. So let's start by taking a little tour through the male reproductive system. And so if you look at this, this is the sagittal section through the male pelvis. And reproduction starts here, and this is the testis. And the testis is outside the body. We'll talk about why that is a little bit later on, but it's in a pouch called the scrotum. So this is where the sperm are made. After the sperm are made, they enter this structure, which is called the epididymis. And this is where they are stored. It's also where they mature. And they stay here until just before ejaculation occurs. And then when the male becomes sexually excited, they enter this tube. And this is called the ductus deferens, sometimes vas deferens. And it travels back into the body cavity. And it goes all the way to back here where there's this enlarged area of this ductus deferens. It's called the ampulla. And they sort of just wait there. And then once the male becomes excited enough, ejaculation occurs and muscle contractions force the sperm into this tube right here. This is called the ejaculatory duct. At the same time that happens, glands also begin to contract and force their fluids in here as well. The first fluid or first glands that do that are the seminal vesicles, and so they add their fluid and it enters this ejaculatory duct. The ejaculatory duct passes through another gland. This is the prostate gland. And if you look, the ejaculatory duct joins on to this tube, which is the urethra. The urethra is this tube that empties the bladder, so it's a shared tube. And so urine also passes through this tube. Well, urine is acidic, and acid kills sperm. And so to prevent that from happening, we have another pair of glands, tiny little glands called bulbourethral glands, and they actually secrete their product before ejaculation. So it goes into this urethra, and what it does is it neutralizes any leftover urine in here, and so it sort of cleanses or cleans the urethra in preparation for the sperm. And so we get this mixture of sperm plus seminal vesicle fluid plus prostate fluid plus this bulbourethral gland fluid, and that's what comes out. And what comes out is called semen. So semen is not just sperm, it's a mixture of a bunch of different things. And then the last part of this reproductive system is the penis. And so the penis is the organ of copulation or the organ of intromission. And so that's sort of just a little tour through it. And we're going to start and talk about each one of those. Well, if we were in lab, we would be using models. So this is one of the models that we would be using. And if you look at it, it's the same thing. It's this sagittal section through there. And so again, we can see the testis, we can see the scrotum, we can see the vas deferens or the ductus deferens. There's the ampulla of it right there. Here's our seminal vesicle right here. There's the prostate gland. There's the ejaculatory duct. Here's the urethra. There's our little bulbourethral glands. And finally, the same thing, the penis. And so exactly what we just saw. Here's another model that we would use, and this is a three-dimensional model, but it shows the same thing. And I'm not going to go through all this again, but it's the exact same thing. This model comes apart, and so in a little while we'll see where it has been taken apart. But that's kind of a tour through the male reproductive system. But it all starts with the testis. And so here's the testis right here. And so let's look at the testis. If we blow it up, it looks like this. So if you look at the testis, it has a thick white wall around it, a coat. And remember, coats are sometimes called tunics. And that's what it's called. It's called the tunica albuginea. Alba means white. And so it's the white coat. And it's white, and the reason it's white is because it's dense, irregular connective tissue. Remember, that has a lot of collagen, and collagen in the body is white. And so when you look at it, it's thick, tough, white coat. But not only does it surround the outside of the testis, it also goes inside and vaginates, and it forms these sort of like walls in here. The walls are called septa, or septum is singular. And what those septa do is they divide the testis up into these little sections, these little compartments. And these little compartments are called lobules. Well, there are a bunch of these lobules in the testis. So these are hollow compartments. And what's inside those compartments is a tiny little tube that is all folded up like crazy. The tube is called the seminiferous tubule. Seminiferous tubule. And the seminiferous tubule is where sperm are made. So inside this tubule are where the sperm are made. Well, if you look at this end of it, it's not open, it's blind-ended, it's closed. But if you look at the other end, it is open. And so what happens inside here is the sperm are produced, and then they travel through the tube like this. And eventually they leave the seminiferous tubule. Well, if we look at that for real, it looks like this. So here's our drawing again. There's our little septa, there's our lobules, there's our seminiferous tubules right in there. And so the seminiferous tubules, again, is where the sperm are made. Well, if we look at this picture over here, you can see this exact thing. So these are those septa right there. And so you can see a compartment. So that's one lobule. And if you look in here, what you're seeing are seminiferous tubules that have been cut. Well, remember, they're all twisty and turny and like that inside the compartment. And so if you make a cut, what you're going to see is sometimes it's going to be a round-looking tube, sometimes it's going to be an oval-looking tube, sometimes it's going to look like this. And that's exactly what we see in here. And so we have different sections in here. We have transverse sections, we have oblique sections, and we have longitudinal sections. But that's where the sperm are made. So Emmy has a question. Let's do this later. Let's finish this first. That's a different topic. So, any questions about this, though? These are the seminiferous tubules. So if we look at them in a little more blown up, it looks like this. So here, these are cross sections or transverse sections. And so look at them, they're round. Well, if you look down here, there's a drawing of one. And look at it. What we have here is a wall. That's the wall of the tubule. And then in the center, there's a hollow space. And like all things when we talk about it, the hollow space is called the lumen. Well, sperm are made here. And so what happens is as sperm are made, they move toward the lumen. So these cells out here are the least developed cells. And if you move this way, we're going to get more and more and more developed until, look, these are actually sperm. And those sperm are then going to be released into this lumen, and they're going to travel through here. And so they're going to travel through here like this once they're completely finished. Well, if we blow that up even more, it looks like this. So look, we have three seminiferous tubules here. Here's the wall, like I said. And so these are the least developed cells. But as we move here, what they're going to do is they're going to become more and more and more like sperm until eventually we get to here. And these are sperm. And you can see their little tails sticking out right here. Same thing over here. All of these are sperm that are developed. And they're going to be released into this lumen. And then they're going to travel through. Any questions about that? There's also another, so sperm are living microorganisms. Well, in reality, that's probably true. We don't call them microorganisms, though, because they're not complete organisms. Remember, sperm. Well, we haven't talked about it yet, but sperm are gametes, and so gametes are not complete cells. In other words, they only have half the material of a normal cell genetically, and so they're not complete, they're not finished, and so we wouldn't call them a microorganism because they can't really exist on their own and do anything. But anyway. So it looks something like this. Well, if we blow it up even more and use a diagram, it would look like this. So again, here's the wall. That's the wall that we were talking about. And here are the cells until eventually we're going to wind up with sperm. And then here's what a sperm looks like. So if you look at a sperm, they have three basic sections to them. They have a head. This is where the nucleus is. This is where the DNA is. They have a midpiece, and the midpiece has a whole lot of mitochondria in it. And then we have a tail, which is basically a flagellum. So the tail is going to allow this sperm to swim. And so sperm are modal, they can swim. And so here's a better picture of that, and you can see those different parts. One other thing that the sperm has is there's a cap across the head right here. It's called an acrosome. And this acrosome, what it has in it are enzymes. So there are enzymes in there, and those enzymes allow the sperm to digest its way into the ovulated oocyte. So without those enzymes, it would not be able to penetrate the oocyte, and it would not be able to fertilize it. So that's what it is. It burrows its way or digests its way in there with enzymes. And then the mitochondria are here because the sperm is going to swim, and swimming requires a lot of energy. And so mitochondria is where we make a ton of ATP. Remember, that's where we do aerobic respiration. And so the energy, the ATP that powers the sperm, that allows it to swim, happens here. And then the tail, if you look at it, it has tubules in it. And these tubules, just like a flagellum, allow the tail to whip back and forth. And as it whips back and forth, it propels the sperm. Let's back up for one thing, though. When we looked at this slide, remember, here are the seminiferous tubules, and that's what these are. But there are also cells that are between the seminiferous tubules. They're not part of it. These cells don't make sperm. What they make are the sex hormones. They make testosterone. And these cells are called interstitial cells. So not only does the testis make sperm, it also makes testosterone, but in different locations. So if we go back to this one, here would be where we would find these interstitial cells. They're in between these seminiferous tubules. And you can see these interstitial cells here and here. These are the cells that make the testosterone. There's also one other kind of cell in here. We can't see it very well in this picture, but if we look at this one, we can see it. So these blue cells that we see are the ones that are going to become sperm. But look, there's this cell too. This cell that they have colored purple. That cell is a completely different cell. It's called a sustentacular cell. So sustentacular has the same word as sustenance in it. And sustentacular cells, what they do is they nourish the sperm. They also protect the sperm. So they provide nutrition, they provide protection. They also move the sperm. They move them because remember, we're going to start out here, but we're going to go this way. Well, these don't have a tail. They're not motile. So these sustentacular cells move them along. Sustentacular cells used to be called nurse cells. So if you think about all the jobs that a nurse has for their patients, that's kind of the same thing that sustentacular cells do for their patients, for these developing sperm. Any questions about that? So this is where the sperm are made. And then remember, they're going to be stored here. And they're going to continue their way out. So let's look at where they're stored. Again, that's called the epididymis. So the epididymis is sort of a comma-shaped organ. It's this one right here. It's really just a long, twisted tube. It has a head, it has a body, and it has a tail. And so if you look at the head, that's where they enter the epididymis. And then they travel through this tube all the way down to the tail. Well, as they travel through the tube, a bunch of things happens to them. The epididymis has this tissue, it's pseudostratified columnar epithelium. So this is pseudostratified right here. And it's ciliated. And what it does, it secretes stuff and it absorbs stuff. And by the time the sperm leave the tube, they are completely mature. When they enter it, they can't swim. And they can't fertilize an egg. They can't do really anything. They're not finished. But by the time they leave it, they're mature, they can swim, and they've developed the capability to fertilize an egg. So this epididymis is really, really important. Well, look at the sperm that are in here. These are sperm. There are tons of sperm in here. The average human male produces about 100 million sperm every 24 hours. 100 million. And so there's a lot of sperm. And so that is going to come out and it's going to mix with those fluids to produce semen. Well, it has to get out somehow. And so that's where this tube comes into play. And this is called the ductus deferens. Again, sometimes it's called the vas deferens. But again, it looks like that. Well, if you look at it in cross-section, it actually has muscles. And so the sperm don't have to swim up this tube. They're sort of pushed along in sort of a milking action as the male becomes sexually excited. And where they go is they go back into the body cavity. So here is the epididymis right here. And then here, remember, is the tail of the epididymis. And right there is this vas deferens, this ductus deferens. Now we have one on each side, just like their testes, two epididymi, there are also two vas deferens. But it's going to go back into the body cavity. And if we look at that, we can see, we can follow it. There's our ductus deferens. It goes back in. And then here, there's this enlarged area of the ductus deferens. That's where there's sort of weight, and that's called the ampulla. So the ampulla is an enlarged area, sort of a staging or waiting place. You can also see it on the model. So there's our testis, our epididymis, And then here's the ductus deferens. It goes through here. And there you can see it coming around there. That's the ductus deferens. Well, if you look at the testis and the epididymis and part of the ductus deferens, it's outside the body. They're outside, but they don't start out that way. They actually start out inside the body. But what happens is during embryological and fetal development is they actually leave the body cavity. They travel down and they pass through a hole in the body cavity to wind up down here in the scrotum. Well, think about this. This is a really, really, really important organ for all animals because this is the next generation. And if this organ fails, there won't be a next generation. And the species is just going to be wiped out. So depending on how you look at it, in the male, this might be the most important organ in the whole body. Because again, it's the next generation. So it seems very, very weird to have it hanging out here in this very unprotected place. Think about the other really important organs, like maybe the brain. The brain is enclosed in the skull. It has a bony case all the way around it. Same thing with the spinal cord. It's in the vertebrae. It has a bony case all the way around it. Think about the heart, the lungs. They're inside the thorax, and there's a rib cage here to protect them. But there's nothing out here to protect these organs. So there has to be a really, really good reason for them to be outside of the body, and there is. And the reason is temperature. You can't make sperm at core body temperature. You need a temperature of about 3 degrees Celsius less than core body temperature. And there's just no way to achieve that if the testes were to remain in the abdominal cavity. And so they don't. They come out here, and they come out here into this pouch. So let's look at the pouch. The pouch is called the scrotum. So if you look at the scrotum, it's skin covered, but it's a lot more than just skin. There are 2 sets of muscles in the scrotum. One set is this one over here, this red one that you see. And this is actually an extension of the external oblique. Internal oblique. It's skeletal muscle. And skeletal muscle is voluntary. So males have a little bit of control over this muscle. But what the muscle does is it lifts the testes. It lifts the testes. Remember, we need a temperature of about 3 degrees Celsius less. But you don't want it too cold because that also interferes with sperm production. And so what can happen is you can lift the testes up close to the body for warmth, or you can relax and let the testes move away from the body so that they can cool off. And so one of the muscles that does that is this one. It's called the cremaster muscle. But the cremaster is just an extension of this internal oblique. There's also another muscle here, and that's this one. This muscle is called the dartos muscle. The dartos muscle is smooth muscle, which makes it involuntary. It has basically the same function. It lifts the testes and it relaxes and lowers the testes. Again, it's all about temperature control. There's another thing to help regulate the temperature here, and that is blood vessels. So if we look at the blood vessels that come out of here, if we look at the arteries, look, the arteries are just straight. Those are the testicular arteries. They look like normal arteries. Well, blood comes through here, and the blood that comes through here is hot. So if we let that hot blood come down here, what it would do is it would heat up the testis, and so the testis would also be hot, and it would be too hot for sperm production. So what we need to do is we need to cool the blood before it gets there. And the way that is accomplished is with veins. So look at these veins right here. They don't look normal. Normally we think of veins as just being straight veins right next to an artery, one right next to the other. But that isn't what they look like. Look at them. They're all like this. They're all twisty and turned, wrapped around these arteries. And what they do is they act like heat exchangers. So the hot blood that comes out of here is right next to the cool blood in the vein. And so the heat moves from the artery to the vein. And so the blood's a little less hot. Come down a little further, the veins are even cooler. So the blood moves from the artery to the vein. Same thing. And so by the time we get down here to the testis, the blood is actually cool. So if you were to take and look at a thermal camera image of this, what you would see is right up here, this area is very, very hot. It's core body temperature. But we're going to lose some of that. So this area is going to be just a little bit cooler. And if you go a little further down, it's going to be a little bit cooler because we're cooling off the blood. And if you go a little bit further, it's going to be a little bit cooler. Until finally, when you get down to the testis itself, the blood is quite cool. So it acts like a heat exchanger. Well, those blood vessels have a name. They're called the pampiniform plexus. So it's a plexus of veins that wraps around these two testicular arteries. So we have muscles, we have these arteries, we have veins. There's also nerves that come down here. Nerves that come down. Well, just like the testes, all of this started up here in the abdomen. But during fetal development, again, it's going to come down. And here's the hole it's going to go through right there. It's called the inguinal canal. And not only does the testis come, but everything that's attached to the testis is going to come with it. And that includes those muscles, it includes the blood vessels, it includes the veins. And so all of this stuff travels down. Not only that, but remember, we have double layered membrane in the abdominal cavity called the peritoneum. And that's also going to get pushed or pulled down with it. It's a double layer. So if we look in here, we should be able to see it, and we can. It's this double layer right here. It's called the tunica vaginalis. There's one layer, and there's one layer. If we back up to our other picture, you can see it quite easily. So here it is right here. Here's one layer, and here's one layer. And again, that's the tunica vaginalis. Well, females don't have a tunica vaginalis. The word vagina doesn't have anything to do with female. The word vagina means pouch, is what it means. And so this is like a little pouch that's holding this testis in place. Now, females do have a vagina, and it is a pouch, but they're not the same thing. So, this testis is inside this scrotum, and the scrotum is this very, very complicated structure. So we've got all of these materials in here. We've got the testis in here. We've got the epididymis, the ductus deferens. All of this stuff is in here, including the muscles, the cremaster, and also the dartos. We've got this pampiniform plexus, we've got the ductus deferens, we've got that artery, all of those things down in there. Anybody have any questions about any of that? So if we look on the model, look, you can see those things. If we blow it up, you can see some of those things as well. Any questions? Okay. Well, from this testis and epididymis, remember we're going to go into the ductus deferens. So here's our ductus deferens, and if we look at it, remember it travels back up. And then here's our ampulla right here. Again, it has muscle in it, so it's not the sperm swimming, it's a pushing or milking action that moves the sperm. And then, again, it goes back in the abdominal cavity, and then here it is right here. Well, if we look at it, it's in here, right here, there it is. It, along with all those other things, travel together, and they're wrapped in connective tissue. And that all that material and the connective tissue wrapping goes through this inguinal canal. Well, all of that material plus the connective tissue together is called the spermatic cord. So the spermatic cord includes all of the things that travel through this inguinal canal. And then from there, remember, we're going to go to here. There's our ampulla. And then when the male becomes sexually excited enough, we're going to get ejaculations. So that's what we're going to get is muscle contractions in this tube. We're going to force the sperm into here, into this ejaculatory duct. As soon as that happens, these seminal vesicles are also going to contract. And so let's look at these glands. So if you look at them here, there's our ductus deferens right there. And then here's the ampulla right here. And then here's this first pair of glands. They're called seminal vesicles. And if you look at the seminal vesicles, they're truly glands. So here's smooth muscle. And so when it contracts, it's going to force the fluid to come out and go into the ejaculatory duct. But if you look in here, you can see that it's a gland. There's a whole bunch of these little tiny pockets that store the fluid once it's produced, and we have tons of these cells that are secreting the fluid, and the fluid is called seminal fluid. And so that seminal fluid is going to be added to the sperm. And then it's going to enter here in this ejaculatory duct. And then we're going to enter this gland. So this is the prostate gland. So if you look at the prostate, it's very similar. But look, the secretory pockets are even bigger. Well, if you look at you read the prostate gland, it's a little bit like a donut because in the center of it is the urethra. And so the fluid is forced into the urethra through tiny little holes. And if you look at that, it looks like a honeycomb, sort of. And so we're going to add this prostatic fluid to what we already have. So now we have sperm, we have seminal fluid, we have prostatic fluid. And then that is going to get forced into the urethra. But remember, there's another pair of glands whose job it is to neutralize the urethra in case there's any urine left in there. Those are called bulbourethral glands, and they also are true glands, and they have this layer of smooth muscle, so when it contracts, it forces the fluid out. But look at all the little glands that are in here. This fluid, which is called pre-ejaculatory fluid, has a lot of mucin in it. Mucin is the same thing you find in mucus. So it has that same protein in it, and it makes it slicky. So this is a natural form of lubrication to aid in copulation. The last thing on this picture is, if you look at this ductus deferens, which is this tube, look at it here. Look at the amount of smooth muscle that's in it. And that smooth muscle, remember, when it contracts, it's going to push the sperm along, sort of like a milking action. And so sperm are going to come, we're going to get the seminal vesicle fluid, the prostate fluid, it's going to mix with this fluid we already have, and it's going to come out, and remember that's called semen. And so the semen then is going to come out through the urethra, and it's going to come out through the penis. So those are the glands. Anybody have any questions about the glands? Again, you can see them here. There's our seminal vesicle. There's our little ampulla. There's the ejaculatory duct. You can see all of these things on this picture. If you take it out and look at it, it looks like this. So again, there's our testis. We already know that. And there's our epididymis. There's our ductus deferens right there. And right there's the ampulla. And the ampulla, again, is where we store the sperm in preparation for ejaculation. There's the seminal vesicles. There's the prostate. There's the little bulbourethral glands, and so on. And if we look at it in a real human and dissect it out, this is what it looks like. So there's the testis, there's the epididymis, there's our ductus deferens. We come here, there's the bulbourethral glands right here. There's the prostate right there. These are the seminal vesicles right here and right here. Now that's the bladder. If we look at it in a different view, you can see the same thing. Again, there's the testis, there's the epididymis, there's the ductus deferens. These are the seminal vesicles, there's the prostate, there's the bulbourethral glands. So somebody had a question. So New says all of the fluid that these glands make will flow into the urethra. That's exactly right. So they're all going to combine into a single fluid, and that fluid, once they're all combined along with the sperm, is called semen. And semen is what comes out. It's what you see when the male ejaculates. Anybody else have a question? There's another model showing those same things. We saw this model also when we did the urinary system, because remember the urethra has 3 sections to it, but it's a shared tube. So not only does the urine have to go through here, but so does the semen. But we already named all these things, but that's the prostate right there. We know that there. You can't see it very well, but that's the ejaculatory duct. And then here's the 3 sections of the urethra. Well, if you look at the male, remember the urethra is long. It's got these 3 sections. So one section is the prostatic, one section is the membranous, and then we have the spongy or penile urethra. Okay, well, we haven't had a chance to talk about the penis, and so let's go back and talk about the penis as well. So, if you look at the penis in the male, human males have no bone in their penis. Now, some animals do, but humans have no bone in the penis. And so they have to rely on some other method to make the penis erect, to make it stiff, to make it rigid, because it has to have achieved that in order to penetrate the female reproductive tract. Well, the way humans do it is with sort of something like hydraulics. So the hydraulics works on fluid under pressure, and that's exactly what happens here. We work with fluid under pressure, but the fluid is blood. And so that blood comes into the penis, and it actually, the fluids leave the blood system through these leaky capillaries, and they enter these vascular spaces inside the penis. And if you do a section through the penis, you can see these vascular spaces. Here they are right here. There are 3 of these. So there are 2 that are dorsal. The dorsal ones are called the corpora cavernosa. So corpora, corpse, means body. So corpora is plural. Cavernosa, like cavern, cavernosa, cavernous bodies. And there are 2 of these. There's also a single one, which is ventral. And the ventral one is called the corpus, which is singular, spongiosum, or the spongy body. Well, they all fill with blood and fluid, but the corpora cavernosa have connective tissue wrapped around them. You can see it right there. And this connective tissue has the same name as the connective tissue around the scrotum. Remember, it's called the tunica, and it's white, so it's called the tunica albuginea. Well, when you have this connective tissue surrounding the chamber, like this, as the blood enters and the fluid leaves, enters those spaces, it pushes against this tunica albuginea, and so the tissue begins to enlarge, it begins to elongate, and it gets rigid. And so what happens is the penis then is able to penetrate the female reproductive tract. There's this other body, though. Remember this corpus spongiosum? It does not have a tunica albuginea around it. And because it doesn't have a tunica albuginea, even though the fluid comes in, there's nothing strong push against like there is over here. And so this space does not become as rigid. It stays spongy. Well, there's a good reason for that, because in the center of the corpus spongiosum is the urethra. So right there is the urethra. And if it became as rigid, as strong, as stiff as the others, the urethra would collapse. And if the urethra collapsed, the semen would not be able to get out. So these become much more rigid, and this one stays spongy. If you look at the penis, it has different sections to it. So there's one section that you can't see on the male. It's hidden. That's called the root. And then there's this section, which is most of the length of the penis. That's called the shaft. And then this one, which some people might call the head, is actually called the glans penis. The glans. So we have a root, we have a shaft, and then we have the glans penis. The glans penis has a layer of skin that protects it. It's like a sheath that fits around it. That sheath is either called the foreskin or the prepuce. And when the male becomes sexually excited, what happens is this folds backwards to expose the glands. Now, some people actually remove prepuce, either for aesthetic reasons or religious reasons or something like that, but it's called circumcision. So circumcision is when you remove this prepuce. Remember, we have these three chambers. So we have the two corpora cavernosa. Well, if you look at the cavernosa, they don't go the entire length of the penis. They only go to here and they stop. And if you look at the root of the penis, the corpora cavernosa stick out like this, sort of like legs. These are called crura. And the crura have a ligament that attaches them to the pelvis, to the pubis. So it gives a stable sort of base for the penis. It stabilizes it. If you look at corpus spongiosum, it does go the entire length of the penis. So here it is all the way to here, from here. But if you look in the root, it's enlarged right here. And if you look down here, it's enlarged right here. So this corpus spongiosum in the root forms what's called the bulb. And then at the other end, it forms the glands. So if we look at the male, here you can see these chambers. So here's the glans penis right here. There's the bulb of the penis right there. There's one of those crura, singular is crus. And look, you can see it going this way. That's that corpus cavernosum. You can also see this one going this way. And that's the corpus spongiosum. If we look at it in this view, it's even easier to see. So here are the crura. That's the corpus cavernosum. There's the corpus spongiosum. If you look right there, that's the bulb. There's the glands. And so we can see these chambers. And then remember, the urethra runs right through the middle of the corpus spongiosum all the way, and that's the route that the sperm and the fluids are going to take to get out. If we look on this model, we can see corpus cavernosum, and we can see the corpus spongiosum. There's the bulb. There's the glands. Here's one of those crura right here. And we can't really see the other one, but there's one of them, the crus. And then if you look on this picture, you can also see all the same things. So there's the crus, the bulb. Here's the glands. There's our chambers. Remember, corpus cavernosum and corpus spongiosum, and right in the middle, corpus spongiosum, there's the urethra. Any questions? And then here's the last slide. This is just a cross section of the penis. And so look, we can see all those things that we were just talking about. So there's our tunica albuginea right there. And look, it only goes around the corpora cavernosa. So there it is here, and here it is here. There isn't one around this. That's the corpus spongiosum. In the middle of it right there is the urethra. You can't see it very well in this picture, but there's where the arteries are, right there. Those are the arteries in the penis, and these are those spaces where the fluid leaves the blood supply and enters these spaces. And again, as the fluid enters here, the chambers fill up, and so the pressure fluid pushes against this tunica albuginea. And so again, the penis then, just like with hydraulics, it's going to elongate, increase in diameter, rigid, and so on. Again, there's no tunica albuginea around the corpus spongiosum. So it does not become as rigid. It stays spongy. Any questions? So that's the male reproduction. So that's where we're going to stop today. So I'm going to go ahead and stop the recording.